a stock Honda Civic would be considerably an upgrade from what we had here. So when Ed Bullion came to me and said, hey, do you want to rebuild a Bugatti Veyron? I said yes. And that started a cascade effect for me to get a real one. I couldn't find one. Turns out they're a little bit hard to find. They're very expensive. They're unobtainium. And I decided that I would settle on something that maybe wasn't as real as what Ed proposed in the beginning. So I found a very fake Bugatti Veyron replica. And when I say replica, I mean it in the loosest possible terms. This was a replica based on the pinnacle of performance, a 1993 Honda Civic. So this was dubbed the Gotti Civic, and I didn't dub it that. It actually had that embroidered on the seats. I bought this from a guy for $4,500, which is overpaying, but I don't think anybody else would have bought this car except for me. And I think that this was perhaps one of my best purchases ever. So this was in the paint scheme of the Bugatti Veyron Supersport. It had orange and black. It actually looked pretty good if you were squinting from 300 feet away and one of your eyes recently had surgery. It was very similar in proportion if you looked at it from the front. It had that Bugatti grille. The bodywork wasn't exactly attached to the car, but I feel like that was just active aero. The rear end, which was mainly fiberglass, they actually fiberglassed over the rear windows to make them look more like a Bugatti, but they just decreased visibility. That was not very Bugatti-like. It didn't look like a Bugatti at all. Obviously, it's a front-engine, front-wheel drive car. I actually thought it was more like a quarter Veyron. So it had 4 cylinders and 1 turbo rather than 16 cylinders and 4 turbos. It had a open differential, which means that one wheel was driving the car at any given time. The Bugatti has 4. It also had around 250 horsepower from that engine, which is $250,000. So this car, being $250,000 car, should cost $250,000. Haha, but it only cost $4,500. It looks like it should have cost $500. And when I turned it on for the first time, there was such a rancid fuel leak that I could only drive it for about 5 feet before it just destroyed my floor. Also, it had spacers on it that were about 6 inches on either side, which made turning interesting. So the previous owner that sold it to me, he brought the car to me in 95-degree heat, wearing a 3-piece suit, all orange. And I don't know whether he wanted to vlog it or something, but he ended up not doing that. He ended up delivering the car to me, and he also had his family in an SUV towing a U-Haul trailer, but the car was not on a U-Haul trailer. I think it was at some point in the journey, but then he just took it off the U-Haul trailer to show me that the car could run. But there's no way that he drove the car essentially 5 hours to my shop because of that fuel leak and also the fact that it would be a death trap on the highway. So it had stock brakes, which meant that it was 1-piston calipers in the front and drum brakes in the rear. It had a insane sound system that was right out of like jegs from 2001. It had some real money put into it, which kind of perplexes me because I don't know why you would spend $10,000 making a car like this when it just becomes worthless. Even as a Honda Civic, I know they're not exactly an appreciating asset, but having a stock Honda Civic would be considerably an upgrade from what we had here. The car overheats. There's a really bad smell coming from the trunk because there's no trunk lining. The rain just goes right in. There's a collapsed section of the sound system. It has 2 big subwoofers in the trunk, and they're just collapsed. It has a rear seat delete. It is a manual transmission, which is better than Bugatti because manual is always better than automatic. And if you turn the wheel, not even turn the wheel, if you pivot the wheel, because it's not bolted down correctly, if you pivot the wheel the wrong way, the horn blares, just uncontrollably. So, and it's also incredibly loud. So they have aftermarket horns, very, very loud, ear-piercing, and yeah, I think I lost a few decibel ranges for myself. But what I wanted to do with this car, essentially, was just a fun exercise. I think it would be interesting for people to see what the mind of somebody that bought this car and turned it into this essentially Bugatti replica was like. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this, but I think it should be something involving a tank. Something involving utter destruction, so this car never sees the light of day again and can never darken a driveway or make anybody think that, hey, maybe that guy has a Bugatti. Oh no, that's not a Bugatti. That's just horrible. So to get into the mind of somebody who does this, I sort of understand it, because that person wants to punch above his weight class. That person wants to be seen not necessarily as a real Bugatti owner, but somebody who aspires to be that. And to me, I become insanely jealous at somebody who can get a Honda Civic, just a bone stock Honda Civic, and put $10,000 into this for this image of higher class to the regular public. Now, there are people that would look at this and say, this is a special car. And that's something that I can always admire. I'm never going to disparage anybody for their car decisions, and I don't think anybody should. I mean, this car is ridiculous. I think it's ugly. It's not very well put together. However, I get what the guy was going for. Having seen somebody else make their kind of janky version of a Bugatti, that makes me want my own. So I'm gonna look for one.